more of a personal, there's about 3 personal experiences I'm going to share with you. And so I'm just going to start again because we're right on the hour. And I like to start right on the hour. My name's Judy Bou Kheir. I'm a licensed professional counselor in the state of Texas. That's in the United States. And I'm actually streaming from a suburb. I'm looking outside of a window right now, and I see lots of fluffy clouds in a suburb of Houston, Texas, where it stays pretty hot during the summer. And would you like to share where you're from? Can you do that in the chat section? Somebody's already saying they're from Louisiana. Welcome, Louisiana. San Diego, New York, Florida, UK. Hello from Alaska, a place I've never been, but I would love to go. Athens, Greece. Welcome. Not very far from my husband's home country of Lebanon, just across the Mediterranean there. Kentucky, Nevada, California, Missouri, North Carolina, Florida, Arizona, Atlanta, Scottsdale. Let's see if we can get a few more. There's somebody else from Texas, Tennessee, Oregon, Georgia, Minnesota, New Jersey, Rome, Italy. Welcome, Rome. Atlanta, California, Russia. Welcome, Russia. New York, Sacramento, California, New York, Flagstaff, Arizona, Northern California, Illinois. It's a hot one here too, as I avoid mowing the lawn. Hey, isn't this a good excuse for avoiding some of those things, right? Yeah, Alabama. Used to live in Birmingham, Alabama. Lived there for a while. Montreal. Welcome, Montreal, Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. Oh boy, I hope in Slovenia. So, and I cannot say, let's see, Ljubljana, maybe? I don't know if that's correct or not. New Hampshire. Let's see if we can get a few more. Another one from California, Oregon, Michigan, Colorado, Boston, Denver. Another one, Virginia. Yeah, Dayton, Ohio, Maryland, South Carolina, Los Angeles, Massachusetts, Toronto, and Truckee, California, and San Francisco. I've got some guys. 2 of my sons live in the Bay Area. They're both in the tech industry. One is a software engineer and the other one's a web developer. So welcome, everybody. And we still got a few more people joining us. I'm just glad that you're here with me today. As I mentioned about a minute ago, I'm Judy Bou Kheir. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. So I am actually a career educator turned therapist. So basically, what does that mean? Well, that means that for years I taught in music education. I had a private studio in voice and piano when my kids were little. And then when my kids got to school age, then I went back to teaching in public school, and I finished my last 20 years of my education career before retirement as a choir director. Now, about 10 years before I retired, I decided to go back to school, and so I went to graduate school, got a master's degree in school counseling, and also did a year of post-grad work in clinical counseling. So I currently hold licensure with the state of Texas as a professional counselor, and I also hold certification with the Texas Education Agency as a certified school counselor. So that gives you some of my credentials. This next part about me is something that I always share at the beginning of these groupinars. I am a person in recovery from alcohol use disorder. And basically what that means is the terminology that you might have heard is alcoholism, a person that's addicted to alcohol. The clinical terminology that we use today is alcohol use disorder. And I was doing a substance use disorders groupinar this past Saturday, I think, or maybe the Saturday before. I did it earlier in the month, and I've got one coming up in a couple of weeks at this same time if you're interested in that particular subject. But I was doing that, and we were going through the slides, and there was one of the slides that was talking about a mild disorder, moderate disorder, severe, and mine was definitely severe. And my treatment involved inpatient treatment. And then I did stepped down care, which was partial hospitalization and then intensive outpatient. I connected to the aftercare program at my treatment facility, and I did that for a year. And I also connected to a recovery community. So I'm still involved in a recovery community. I don't want to go back there. And through all of that, I got some wonderful care from some trained professionals. But through all of that, I also had to learn better mental health strategies moving forward. And actually, my recovery resulted in me changing careers late in life. I'm 62 years old. And so I've got this whole other career now that I'm doing. I run a small nonprofit helping teens find recovery from substance use disorders in the greater Houston area. And when I say small, very, very small, but we do our part. And this particular group in R is not about my recovery, but it is about the fact that I am a person that has recovered from a mental health disorder. And that may be helpful for those of you that are out there right now and you're struggling. You're here to find some answers. And I just hope if you don't get anything else from me today, that you get some hope. Okay. That's really what I want to instill in every single person that's attending today. So I've been married to my husband now for 36 years. We have 4 adult children. Now, this last part, life has dramatically changed for the better. Yours can too. I am certainly not your poster child today for how to do everything right in your life. In fact, I'm going to share with you some of the struggles and some coping things that I did to get a handle on changing my perspective. That's probably one of the most profound things that I've done in my own recovery is just change the way that I look at things. Okay. So I'm excited. I'm very excited to share that with you today. Okay, so we're going to start with a definition of perspective. I did what any well-educated and professional person would do. I Googled it, and this actually comes from the Google Dictionary, but it was the best one. So here it is. Perspective is defined as a particular attitude toward or a way of regarding something, a point of view. Now, you'll see me occasionally looking down to my left, and I've got some notes, and I want to make sure I don't forget anything whenever I'm presenting today. I've been doing this one for a while. This was actually the first one that I ever presented on the groupinars. And so you'd think that I'd have it completely memorized, right? Wrong. I want to make sure I don't forget anything. So some of the other ways that we can view perspective, I wrote 3 down just from my own, just me. I came up with these, right? It's looking at life with a new set of glasses, stepping outside my own life and looking at it from another person's point of view, or walking a mile in someone else's shoes. So I want to give you a minute. If you were going to share with everyone, what's your definition of perspective? What would that mean? Okay, hold on. Let me answer a question here real quick. I don't like the word disorder. In the other groups, they talk about not using that word. Why is it that you use it? Because that's clinically what I had. I had a mental health disorder. It is diagnosed, and it's actually I was diagnosed with alcohol use disorder, and that's just what it is in medical terminology or clinical terminology. So I'm not suggesting that anybody here today has a mental health disorder. That is not my suggestion. But what I'm telling you is the truth about me. So I hope that clarifies that a little bit. So I hope that was helpful. Viewpoint, outlook on life, opinion and viewpoint. Yeah, outlook, how I see and feel about the world, interpretation of one's life events. Perspective is putting on goggles. Yeah, they talk about, okay, now hold on. We got a whole other conversation going on in the chat section. So let me see if I could clarify or answer any questions before we move any further, because I certainly don't want to offend anybody on the first slide or the second slide, right? Okay. Yeah, they talk about not labeling, using a term that is very touchy when called out in the public. Just wanted to understand. Um, well, on the platform, we never do a formal diagnosis. The platform is not designed for that. But there are those of us in the mental health profession that must offer clinical diagnosis for insurance purposes in our own private practices. And so we do have to define it, just like your doctor when you go to your medical doctor and he senses something. Like, for example, I was also diagnosed by my by one of my physicians with osteoporosis, and thankfully they gave me a correct diagnosis so I could start doing something about it. So I hope that's going to help a little bit with that. Okay, personal views, the lens we view our day through, perspective, something I can always gain a new one of. That's correct. Frame of reference. So that means that you're taking your past history and your past experiences, and you've got a frame of reference, the slice of the spectrum that is visible to me based on my lived experience. Perspective is process of clarification. Thank you, everyone, for sharing those. I just happened to pick some quotes, and I'm going to share 3 of those with you. The first one comes from Stephen Covey. If you've never read anything written by Stephen Covey, he was the New York Times bestselling author that wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I haven't read that book in probably about 20 years, but it impacted my life so much 20 years ago that I recommended it recently to one of my clients online. So it was one of those bestsellers. And this is what he says about perspective. To change ourselves effectively, we first had to change our perceptions. And then this next one is by Oscar Wilde, and he wrote, "The optimist sees the donut, the pessimist sees the whole." That gives you the 2 extremes of perspective. And then this last one is from Corrie ten Boom, a Dutch Christian watchmaker who saved many Jews during the Holocaust by hiding them in her home. And she says, "Child, you have to learn to see things in the right proportions. Learn to see great things great and small things small." I really, really like that one. And that kind of goes along with us talking about balancing perspective. So on this next slide, you'll notice that I use the word right-sized, and I'm going to explain that because I'm going to be using that terminology throughout the groupinar today. So when I first approached the counseling team on the platform and asked them, actually, they had sent an email out and asked, "Is there anyone that has a groupinar idea?" And so, of course, I'm like, I'm always full of ideas. So I said, yes, of course, this is what I'm thinking of. And so the original title of this groupinar was Living Life with a Balanced, or excuse me, a right-sized perspective. And so they said, "Judy, we like everything that you've presented in your slides. We think we think people will resonate. It'll resonate with people, but the title might confuse them. They might think it's about weight loss." And so I just want to tell you right now, this is not about substance use disorders. This is not about weight loss, but it is about finding a balance. So when we're talking about what right-sized people do, here's some of those things. They understand their strengths and they understand their challenges. They regularly practice self-care strategies that promote self-esteem. So taking care of yourself, self-care, right? Looking at periods of difficult circumstance as opportunities for growth. Foster reasonable expectations for themselves and others, and then surround themselves with others who validate them. Social supports. So we're going to talk about these three areas: right sizing yourself, how you view yourself; right sizing circumstance, what happens outside of you; and then right sizing yourself in relationships. So in relationship to others. All right. Let's move on. Let me scroll up here just a little bit. Okay, so let's talk first about right sizing yourself. We're going to spend a few slides talking about this. And the first thing we're going to start with understanding strengths and understanding challenges. So some of the questions that you can look at when you're understanding strengths: what are my assets? What are my talents and abilities? And then, just like we're looking at one side of the coin, flip over that coin, look at the other side. Where do I need growth? And we're going to talk just briefly about the power of self-reflection. And then I'm going to give you a little something on apologies that I walked through in my own life after recovery from alcohol use disorder. So I'm going to share that with you. All right. So let's get started. Let's talk about these strengths, talents, abilities, assets. Now, assets are those things that you've accumulated over time. I want to share just something from my notes. Some of those things that you may have learned in childhood, you learned them through hard work. You learned them from education. You learned how to be polite to others. You learned how to take care of yourself, to be independent. You learned that it was better to share than to be selfish. Maybe you learned to tell the truth and to be honest when playing games. So you learned how to be a good sport. Those are some of the things that we collect over the life experience, right? But there's also things that perhaps we're born with. And I'm just going to share one of mine right now. At an early age, my parents realized that I seemed to have a talent for music, because when I was around a piano around the age of 4 or 5 years old, I would sit down and I would try to play melodies on the piano, like maybe Mary Had a Little Lamb or Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. I would pick out melodies. And so my parents said, we've got this musical prodigy, and this genius of a child, right? That's what parents do when a child shows maybe an ability for something. And so at the age of 5 years old, my parents enrolled me in piano lessons, and hence that decades long career as a music educator. Okay, now not only did I work as a music educator, but I honed the skill of piano playing, and I still work as a part-time professional musician today. Now, this is what I know about my own unique set of abilities. This is a talent and skill that not everyone possesses. It's definitely one of my strengths. So I want to give you an opportunity here for a couple of minutes to share two of your talents or abilities. Let's talk just briefly about some of those things that you consider, yeah, that is an area of strength for me. Can you share that in the chat section? Okay, all righty. Theater, perfect pitch. Ooh, I'm a little bit jealous here. I do not have, I've been a musician for decades, but I do not have perfect pitch. Flexibility, creativity, artistic eye, drawing. I'm unfamiliar with this word. Autodidactism, highly detailed. I learn new skills very fast. I'm a good cook and have a green thumb. My dad was somebody that had a green thumb. I mean, he could grow tomatoes. You've never tasted the most delicious tomatoes from my dad. Problem solving, drawing and cooking, creativity, educating others with compassion. Logical reasoning, piano. I've got another pianist out there. Encourager. An encourager is a wonderful friend. They're able to encourage their friends. Empathy and compassion, a couple of other good friendship traits. Performer, my business mentality and my athleticism. And my husband is somebody that's just a naturally gifted athlete. I'm an empath and focused, listening and writing. I'm going to scroll down just a little bit, see if I can get a few more of these that were closer to the end. Persistence and motherhood, singer, songwriter, guitar, banjo. I got my bachelor's degree in composition, so I am a songwriter as well. I can relate to that. Problem solver and an engaging personality. How wonderful. Making people laugh. Athletic, humor, ambitious. I own my own business and I'm creative. Autodidact, teaches one's self. Well, then I guess I should say that about my son. My son is a self-learner. He loves learning on his own. Compassion, languages and spatial organization. Self-awareness, composer. Here we go. Self-education is education without the guidance of masters. Thank you for the definition. Thank you, guys. I appreciate that. Always wanting to improve myself. Let's see. Singer, songwriter, sales shopper. I have the ability to make quick business decisions. So someone is sharing, I have no area of strength, and someone's giving a suggestion here to take a survey, questionnaires on this website to find your character strengths and to engage in, and with a smile. Thank you for sharing that. All righty. So assets, sometimes when we come into therapy, we may not be at the top of our game. We're coming in because we've got a problem. Something's troubling us, and we're thinking, I've got to get a professional to help me work through this and figure this out, right? And so sometimes when we come in, we may have a difficult time seeing any positive assets that we have in ourselves, in our personality. So it's really a good idea to explore those, especially if you're at a place in life where you're thinking, what do I have? I don't really have a lot. On the flip side of the coin, areas that need growth. Okay. So let me hold on just here. There we go. All right, areas that need growth. And I have flipped over too many pages. Here we go. So what areas are challenging for you? Now, sometimes we come in and we're only looking at the challenges. Like I said on the previous slide, we can't see where we have any assets, talents, abilities. We're only looking at this is going wrong and that's going, I'm not able to do this. I can't do that. I can't seem to keep a relationship. We've got a list, correct? But for some of us, and I'm going to share from my own personal experience, when I first came into recovery, one of the things that I was required to do in my recovery journey, in my peer-supported recovery group, was I needed to look at my part of things. And I had a really, really hard time doing that. I think it was because I felt so much shame from some of the things that had happened because of my drinking. And it was scary for me to look at those things and really acknowledge them. But looking at yourself from both sides of the coin gives you a clearer understanding of who you are and balancing that you're not going one way or another. So what area is challenging for you? What area of your life is causing emotional pain? So just like recognizing strengths is important, it's also important for self-growth that you look at areas where you can improve. During that appraisal, be kind to yourself. It's not all one way or all another. Remember, we talked about right sizing or a balanced perspective. Sometimes we may tend to only look at our challenges without recognizing our strengths. And then sometimes we have difficulty looking at challenges. This may be due to feelings of shame, just like I mentioned a minute ago, because we feel less than or we feel inadequate. Okay. Now, I want to give you a space where I'm not going to talk for about 10 seconds. And I want you to think of one of those areas of challenge. Don't share it in the chat section. That's something for you just to hold on to inside yourself. All right. So that's something, if you have not shared with your therapist, that's what you need to be sharing with them this week. All right. Share that one area that maybe you haven't told anyone. And you're saying, I really would like this to change about me. Okay. Now I want to share the power of looking at things from a more balanced perspective. All right. And this is an actual situation that happened with my husband and I 10 years ago. So we've been married 36 years. So we'd been married for about 25 years. And remember, I told you that toward the end of my teaching career, the last 10 years that I went back to graduate school. And my journey to graduate school was a direct result of my recovery. So I wanted to make a difference in more kids' lives. And then what that ended up morphing into was being able to touch other besides just students in a classroom, being able to touch other people. Okay. And so I'm sitting there with my husband. We're having that argument that if you've been married for any length of time, or you've been in a long-term relationship for any length of time, you usually start having these conversations, these arguments that don't really go anywhere and they never get resolved. And we were in one of those arguments. And to be honest with you, I couldn't even tell you necessarily what it was about. But I had just started graduate school. And so we were learning this skill of self-reflection, not self-reflection, excuse me, of reflective listening. And that's where you're just listening intently. You're doing focused listening, and in reflective listening, you're able to paraphrase back to the speaker what they've just said, and it helps the speaker feel understood, right? But there's a byproduct of that, and that is for the listener to get information that maybe they're blocking. And in reflective listening, if you're doing it accurately, you don't have the lawyer inside of the head coming up with the next rebuttal of what I'm going to say next. You're hearing what he says, but you're not really hearing what he says, right? And so here I was, I'm going to do this. I know, I'm in graduate school, I'm learning how to be a counselor. Why don't I just try this reflective listening on my husband? And I start listening, and guess what? I heard him say, "You blame me. You always blame me." And for the first time in our marriage, probably, I'm just going to say yes, for the first time in our marriage, I actually heard him, and I had a moment of self-reflection. And I was thinking, am I blaming him? Do I blame him? Oh my gosh, I am blaming him. And so I said out loud, "Honey, I think you're right. I think that's a pattern for me. I think I think I get in this thing where I just want to blame you." Now let me explain what happened after that. So the conversation, obviously, just the argument ended. But later on, I had a moment of quiet time by myself where I could just really do some deeper self-reflection. I'm like, why is this pattern going on with me? What's going on there? And I hit the nail on the head. I had a really hard time saying no. My husband can be very persistent. He still is. He can be very persistent. And let's say that we had some kind of a decision that we needed to make jointly, like on finances, a financial decision. And so he would come to me and he wanted to do something some way, and I just didn't feel right about it. But he would just keep pestering me. And I'm like I told you, he's very persistent. Just keep, coming at me and telling me. And I wouldn't say no to him. Finally, I'd just throw my hands up in the air and I'd say, well, all right, then go ahead and do what you're going, just go ahead and do it. And I would go along with it. Now, here's the catch. I took my hands off of the responsibility in the decision making. I took myself out of being responsible with him for a decision that was going to impact both of us just by not saying, no, I'm not doing that. Because I didn't want him to get angry. I didn't want to hear him rant to me about it. And then, whenever it went south, the decision went south, then I could blame him. I didn't have to hold any responsibility. Now, all of that uh, was a huge learning experience for me. See, me engaging in that pattern of behavior was not a balanced way of myself. It wasn't a balanced a way to have a balanced perspective of myself, to have a balanced, healthy perspective, right? Okay. So I started learning how to say no and setting boundaries. And what I shared with him was it's better for me to say no and stay out of resentment with you and to blame you later. It's better for me to say no now. And thankfully, he's been able to accept this change in me. All right. I want to talk quickly just about apologies. This is something else that really was helpful to me. I found that one of my patterns was saying I'm sorry to someone because they were angry or upset with me, even if I hadn't done anything wrong. And when I started to get a better balanced perspective, right sized perspective of myself, I started realizing that I am not being kind to myself when I do that. I was just trying to appease the other person and make the relationship okay, but I wasn't being honest and truthful, and I wasn't acting in ways of integrity toward myself. So now when I need to make an apology, I don't say I'm sorry anymore. But I do say I'm wrong. And for me, I'm wrong is easier to say. It denotes my humanness. And this is the thing about me being wrong. If I'm wrong, then I have the ability to correct that. If I'm sorry, then it's just something inherently wrong with me. And so I'm hoping that little perspective on this one issue makes sense and is helpful to you. Okay. Just remember, if you've made a mistake, you have the opportunity to correct it. Now, that doesn't mean that a person, that my loved one might still be angry and upset. I can, even if I'm not apologizing and saying, hey, I was wrong here, I can go over to my loved one and say, hey, know that my decision has upset you. I know that what's happened has been upsetting to you, and I'm willing to listen to you. I want us to talk it out. But I'm really careful about making apologies or amends. I make an amend if I've done something that was wrong. Okay, so that gives you the little take on that. And then quickly, I want to go to regularly practicing self-care. So I'm just going to give you my top 5 things that are really helpful to me. I'll give you a little bit of information about each one of these. Exercise. Studies have shown that regular exercise improves mental health. Exercise can also be used to elevate mood. So over the course of time, exercise helps balance um, chemicals in the brain. I guess it's all that oxygen and that blood flow, and it does help stabilize mood over time. And then it can also elevate mood. If you're feeling depressed in the morning, you wake up and like, there's no way I'm going to the gym. If you make yourself go, 9 times out of 10, when you finish that workout and you get that cardiovascular, you get your cardiovascular system going and you get those endorphins moving around, then you feel better afterwards. Quiet time for self-reflection. This is a time where you can sit without any interruptions, just for a few minutes in the day. My quiet time happens in the morning. I try to do some self-reflection. I might be journaling. Some people read spiritual literature. I do that as well. Some people find that a quiet time is better for them before they go to bed. And so they might do that at the end of the day. Journaling is a good activity to do during your quiet time when you get ideas or you want to check in about your thoughts about something or your feelings about something. Say no when needed. That's all about boundaries. And we've got a group in I think within this last month, I think it's still rotating on there about how to say no to people. And boundaries are really, really important because that's one of the best ways that you can practice self-care, letting people know where that line in the sand is for you. All right. Find time to play. This is one that I share with my clients quite a bit because I think sometimes as adults, we get in that spot where we're responsible. We're responsible at work, and then we come home and we're responsible at home. And then if we have elderly parents, then we're responsible for family members outside of our home. Maybe we have friendships and we're responsible there. Maybe we have other communities, social communities that we're participating in, and we have responsibilities there. So it's really important that you give yourself time to do something that you enjoy and find activities where you can play and have fun, where you can laugh. So give yourself permission to do that. And then volunteering. Volunteering actually is beneficial in a couple of ways. One way is that when you are focused on a cause or helping another person, just for that brief period of time, it gets you outside of yourself. It has your attention focused on something else, and you're not so focused on your problems. But the second reward is when you see that cause, the work that you've done, and it's come to fruition, there's that feel good after it's over and you feel like you've contributed to something. All right. So that's just quickly on self-care strategies. I want to give you just a short amount of time, maybe just a minute or two, for any questions you might have. And you are welcome to ask them. And I'll see if I can answer it in 10 to 15 seconds. I'll be happy to do so. All righty, someone's typing, so we'll wait just a second. What if you are having a hard time motivating yourself to do self-care? You know, you can always take an action even if you don't feel like it. It might be as hard as you might have to break it down into smaller bits, like, okay, today, like for example, my goal is to get to the gym, or my goal is to go outside for a walk. And so today I'm going to put my left shoe on. Okay, now I'm going to put my right shoe on. Now I'm going to stand up. I am going to step outside. Okay, I'm going to only walk for 5 minutes. And then at the end of your 5 minutes, can I walk for 5 more? Sometimes it's playing that kind of breaking it down into those smaller steps. But just remember, you can always do something. You can always take an action, even if you don't feel like taking an action. You do not have to let your emotions or your feelings dictate what you will do or what you will not do. All right, so I hope that was helpful. And then let me scroll down here. How did you find the motivation to take the leap toward change and recovery? How did it relate to confidence and perspective? Well, I would say that actually what I'm sharing with now is what I've learned in recovery, and one of those things was hugely changing my perspective about a lot of different things, changing my perspective about my relationship with my husband, changing my perspective about the circumstance that I had at work, changing my perspective about myself, actually acknowledging my strengths, and then also having the courage to look at my weaknesses so I could attain some personal growth. Okay, so I'm hoping that explained that just a little bit. What do you do if someone won't listen to you? You want the easy answer? Quit talking to them. but but a more helpful. Okay, Judy, that was really funny, right? Okay, but a more helpful answer is learn uh, learn some skills and like the I statements. Learn how to deliver information to that person in a way that's non-blaming. Brene Brown has a great take on I statements. She calls it the story I'm telling myself. So you could easily Google Brene Brown, the story I'm telling myself. It's a way that she utilizes an I statement. I hope that was helpful. All right, everyone, we're going to scoot on because we want to make sure that we have enough time for the last two things that we're talking about. So we're going to talk briefly about right-sizing circumstance. And here's some of the things that you'll do that can be helpful to you in right-sizing circumstance. Take time first to self-reflect. Check in with what are you feeling? What are those emotions? Identify them. And then what are you thinking? In other words, what are the thoughts underneath the emotions? We're going to talk about a cognitive behavioral therapy tool called Challenging Irrational Thoughts. The next one is that you use rational counter statements, but I like the terminology replacement thoughts. And then we're going to talk briefly on resiliency. Okay? So the first couple of things when something happens is make sure that you're checking in. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? Okay, identifying those emotions. Now, one of the things that I use with my clients in identifying emotions might be something like this feelings chart, but I've got an even better tool that I use, and it's called a feelings wheel. And I believe you can just type in feelingswheel.com. That's where I got my last one. It's just a website that has this big, huge wheel, and it has the primary emotions in the center. And then as it spokes out, it gives the more nuanced emotions. All right. So, for example, anger, the primary emotion, as it spokes out, it's also described as frustration, irritability, bitter, critical, annoyed, hostile, infuriated, violated, indignant, resentful, betrayed. Those are some of the more nuanced emotions. So, yeah, you know you're angry, but what type of angry, right? And then once you can identify the emotions, you want to be able to check in with what's the thought underneath the emotions. And I'm going to give you just a real present day thing that happened to me just a few months ago presenting these groupinars. So I'm not even 1 month into presenting this very groupinar on balanced perspective. And I'm still trying to learn. I'd gotten AirPods for my son for Christmas. And so they're connecting just fine with everything that I'm using. You know, if I use FaceTime, they're connecting. If I use Google Meet, they're connecting. On the platform, on the counseling platform, they're connecting. So I get onto Click Meeting. I've got the AirPods in, and I start the meeting, and no one can hear me. That's why I always do a mic check, right? Okay. So, and that's why now I use a wired connection, because the AirPods aren't 100% on Click Meeting. I've figured that out. So I'm presenting this, we get to the question and answer, and usually at this time, I am bulldozing straight through to the end of my presentation. After the question and answer, I'm not always checking the comment section. And so I get finished, and all of a sudden I go to one more question and answer, and there's dozens, hundreds of messages. And I start going through, and they're like, hello, we can't hear you. Hello, hello, hello. And for whatever reason, the last half of the groupinar, no one could hear me. So here is this in real time for me. Here are the emotions I felt after that groupinar: failure, embarrassment, anxiety. My anxiety level was up, just on a scale of 1 to 10 was probably a 9. And here are the messages underneath my emotions, what's eliciting my emotions. I looked awful as a professional in front of my attendees. The counseling team will never want me to present again because I don't know how to do it. What if the people in my groupinar think my presentation is stupid? Well, if they can't hear the last half of it, what are they supposed to think, right? Okay, now not all of those thoughts are rational, but it gave me a chance to come up with some replacement thoughts that helped with my emotions. And here they are. What can I learn from this circumstance? You're looking at it right here. I use a wired connection now every time I present on Click Meeting, always. I'm hopeful last week attendees will be forgiving and come back this week. And guess what they did? They came back that following week when I presented again. I'll only get better with groupinars by doing them. I'm learning something new. That helped me bring it down. So that helped me right size the circumstance and see it from a more rational perspective. All right. Now, I want to mention something that happened with my oldest son a few years ago, and I'm probably going to have to read some of this just to make sure that I don't leave any of it out. But 6 years ago, my son moved back home. And you know what? I said 6 years ago, and it's actually now been 7 years. When he moved back home. He was living in California, working in the tech industry, and he's a contractor. He does, so he has his own business and he contracts his work out to, to different organizations. And so he could do his work remotely. So he came back home and he told us, I'm going to build a tiny house. And we were like, okay, all right, you're going to build a tiny house. And we live on an acreage, so it gives him more room. And so was his rationale. That's why he's going to do it. So he's doing that. And during about the first 3 months, he made a really poor financial decision. And then he finally, after about a month of stewing over it, he finally opened up to me about it. So I listened to him. He was anxious. He regretted the decision. And I let him talk for nearly an hour, exploring what he would need to do to correct his mistake. And I'm going to tell you, it wasn't going to be easy. And finally, I just looked at him after he had finished talking and I said, honey, you know what? It's only a tragedy if you didn't learn something from it. Now, here I am 7 years later. He got it all resolved. He's in great financial shape right now. And he learned something. So I made this comment: learning to find the growth opportunities in challenging circumstances lead to resiliency. And would you believe that I put that on this slide and then thought, hold on a minute, that's my opinion. I need to look at the research. Is that true? Do challenges and going through challenging circumstances and situations, do they make people more resilient? And guess what? The research says yes. In fact, this one slide led me to write a whole other groupinar about building resiliency. And that all came from this one slide with my son. Okay? So these challenging circumstances are only a tragedy. See, it's just reframing, looking at it from a different perspective. Does it hurt like heck when you're going through it? Absolutely. You wouldn't be human if it didn't. But at the end of it, what did I learn? What did I learn? Okay. Now we want to talk about right sizing in relationships to others. So right-sizing expectations. And I'm going to start this part of the group and R with just a few words: less than, more than, equal to. So when we right size other people in relationship to ourselves, in other words, we think maybe we're greater than, but when we bring that back down and right size it, we give them the dignity that is their right as a person on this earth, sharing the human experience with us. Now, I didn't ever have too much trouble acknowledging the worth of others. Mine was the opposite. And when we right size ourselves in relation to others, maybe people even in authority, okay, when we're able to right size ourselves and understand that we are still in the human experience equal to those people's, it means that we are not less than another person. We're not greater than another person, but we are equal to that person, and we're all a part of humanity. Now, in terms of expectations of others, I wanted to share something really briefly about that, because there's times that our loved ones are going to disappoint us. I share with my clients many times it's okay to extend grace to others. Grace just means that they didn't do anything to deserve your compassion, nor have they earned it. And then in that same way, we can extend compassion toward another person. Even if they've made a mistake, we can extend that compassion toward ourselves. Now, I want to say something real quick about extending grace toward another person. You are not being another person's doormat when you extend grace to them, okay? It is a conscious decision that you make. For example, me telling my husband, okay, go ahead, yes, all right, go ahead and do that thing, right? Because I'm fearful of saying no. I don't want the anxiety of saying no, and he's not, he's going to be upset with me, and oh my goodness, it sounds a little codependent, doesn't it? He's going to be upset with me, and that's one thing. But grace is a conscious decision I make, that even though someone has erred, I can extend compassion toward them. All right. And let me scroll down here. We are close to the end, and then we'll have a little bit of time for questions. Now, in understanding and right-sizing expectations of others and right-sizing relationships to other people, it's really good to also understand who that inner circle is around you, people that really care about you and validate you. That's something that I've really developed in this last 10 years, identifying those people that are for me, okay, that can give me honest feedback. They know me, they love me, but they're able to give me honest feedback if I need it. All right. So I want you to think for a moment about the people in your life who really count. Who are they? Is it your mom? Is it your dad? Is it your sibling? Is it a spouse? Is it your partner? Is it a loved one? Maybe it's a colleague that you really have just this good work relationship with, and you both have good work ethics, and so they're able to give you feedback constructively, and they're for you, right? Who knows you the best and still loves you anyway? And here's a harder question: who in your life cares enough to tell you the truth? So this last story is about something that happened while I was still teaching, and I had a pretty poor attitude with a decision on our campus that didn't go my way, a decision by an administrator on campus that didn't go my way, and so I had kind of a poor attitude. Now here I am telling you about this healthy perspective, right? So it's obvious that I hadn't quite I hadn't quite honed that skill, and that, or maybe I had just kind of relapsed into an old behavior. But I was really nursing that. I'd kind of taken that decision personally, and so I wasn't very happy with this administrator, and she could tell. And so I get called into her office, and I'm thinking, uh-oh. But she never puts it to me directly. She doesn't start out the conversation. I've noticed that you've been upset. I want to talk about it. What's going on? No. That's not what happened at all. So she shuts the door, and then she starts telling me that my attitude hasn't been great. She's been hearing from parents and students about my attitude, which was false. The only person I had an attitude problem was her. And then she also inferred that I wasn't doing my job. And then she finally ends a conversation with word on the street about my attitude. And this was at a period of time where I'd just gotten my certification as a school counselor. And she's telling me word on the street about my attitude would affect my future employment. In other words, I would never get a school counseling job. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but occasionally we run into leadership like that, right? And so I really had to discern in this relationship with her what is on her side of the street and what is on my side of the street. So, did she make me feel about that tall? Yeah, she sure did. I walked out of her room, and I went home and cried. I told my husband about it, and he's one of these people, a person who validates me. He listened to the whole story, and he said, that doesn't sound anything like you. I think she's gaslighting you. I think she's trying to intimidate you. She's saying whatever she can to intimidate you. Maybe she wants you to quit, And then later that day, I called a supervisor that is over the music department for the district. And I just said, I need to talk to you about something confidential. And I was able to just get an idea on some of the things that she had said. And because she had inferred I wasn't doing my job. And he asked me a series of questions. And then at the end of that, he said, Judy, you're doing your job. Don't worry. You are doing your job and you're doing it well. Okay, so she lied to me, right? And then finally, I talked to a couple of colleagues at work, and I said, this is what's been said to me. People that won't gossip. Okay? I'm not trying to tell my story all over the campus. I am trying to get some actual feedback. And they said, Judy, this doesn't sound like you. I'm kind of shocked that, she would even infer that about you. And, you're thinking straight. But then I had that quiet moment in my own quiet time, self-reflection. And I said, okay, what's stuff that she said that I need to leave over on her side of the street with her? And is there anything I need to own? And the one thing that she had said was my attitude. And that's all about me. And I want to be a person of integrity. So the next morning, I walk in to her office, and I do believe she was slightly shocked because I think she thought she had taken care of me. And I said, you told me a lot of things yesterday that might not have been easy for you to say, but there was one thing that you told me about my attitude, and I want you to know that I heard it. And so I'm here to tell you, as long as I work with you here, that you will see a far better attitude from me. And I think you needed to hear that. So that's my commitment here. And then I just walked out. Now, this was all about me. In other words, I went to her and I made an amends. I was wrong. This is what I heard you say. This is, you're going to get a better attitude. This is how I'm going to correct that, right? And I just want to tell you that it was all about who I want to be and continue to be, and to continue to grow to be, right? Be a person of integrity and own what is mine. And I can't always do that without feedback from those people who I really trust. All right. So we have about 1 minute. How do you handle being so overwhelmed by life that you end procrastinating the whole day away and then get furious because you've wasted a perfectly good day. I find on good days I am very efficient, but in other days it's very bad. And these bad days are increasing over time. I, s- One strategy, and this is not necessarily an evidence based by the numerous research studies or anything, but one strategy that I found helpful in my own life is just to tell myself to be okay. Like I have a to-do list that I keep on a legal pad, and I just give myself permission. Today it's okay just to do 5 of these things, or today it's just okay to do 3 of these things. I think sometimes we get overwhelmed with looking at the whole entire thing, and I think it can be easier if we just say, I'm just going to, okay, which ones are on fire for today? Let me knock these 3 out. So I hope that suggestion was helpful. Let me scroll down here just a little bit, see if I can answer 1 or 2 more questions. Let's see here. Oh, any questions? How do you handle a situation that was almost exactly like your employment story, but ended the opposite way, where they continued to pick on the small things and use them to gaslight you and fire you? Ooh, I don't think I can answer that in the time that we have remaining. But I would suggest that maybe that's something that your therapist can help you work through, because getting a different perspective on that, I wonder if a year from now, you are in a much better place in a healthier work environment, and you look back on that experience saying, that person actually did me a favor. All right. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for attending. I'm glad that you spent this hour with me. I appreciate it. Thank you. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the week. Thank you so much. All righty. And thank you. Y'all take care. Bye-bye.